Nicole is from a bachelor degree in computer science engineering at Canada's Royal Military College. You have built a strong expertise on cybersecurity strategies development, but also on risk and teams management. Within the Government of Canada and its Department of National Defence, you have begun your career as a network vulnerability assessment team leader and ended up 13 years later as Special Advisor on Cyber Intelligence Capability Development. You then became Director of Cytelligence Canada and now DISC's CEO. We had your Vice President on a panel yesterday and we are utmost glad to have you here now. Please.
Thank you for the introduction. It's the first time I've had a theme song. That was great. Good way to just come up to the stage. So welcome everybody. Thanks for attending. So as I introduced, my name is Scheurkogel. I'll be talking today about intrusion detection, why and the how. This is not going to be the why and the how from a technical perspective, right? This is the main stage. So we'll be talking about actually the harder element of this problem, which is from a business perspective. Why do you want to do it? A bit of how those programs work and how, from a programmatic perspective, you want to implement a monitoring solution within your satellite company. So why this talk? It's our perception being in this, we're a cyber company getting into space. It's our perception that there's a bit of a lack of understanding of the benefits of why you'd want to invest as a cost-saving measure and a cost-controlling measure into monitoring in this area. So that's sort of the impetus of why we're here. But the good news is for some of you, it's the only people who need to pay attention to this are ones who have satellites and constellations that have information or gather information or transmit information that's of value. So if that doesn't apply to you, then this isn't going to be important. So from just an outline of what we're going to talk about, a little bit of an introduction, and then I'll talk about business and cyber, a bit of the challenges, why it's hard, some of the perception issues that we're dealing with. We'll talk about intrusion detection from a benefits perspective and a bit of a high-level understanding of what it looks like and what the main components are. And then I'll get into what are the key components you need from a programmatic perspective to make sure that works. It's not a technical solution. A lot of this is people, process, an organizational orientation to make monitoring not just useful from a threat context, but also from a day-to-day operational context. So my background, I've been in this industry for about 20 years. I started in the Canadian military. I spent time as both the chief security architect and the head of cyber intelligence capabilities and operations. From that, I've been doing a range of different things: breach response, engineering, intelligence, international operations, a range of things. If you're curious, you can hit my LinkedIn page. I won't pitch myself more than that. But I've been in this industry quite a long time. So let's talk about understanding business, the business and cyber. So this is the hard problem. This is the hard problem for everybody, regardless of what your industry is, right? How can we find the economic balance between the utility of what we do in cybersecurity, the actual tangible benefit of that, and the cost, right? This is everybody's problem. But this is especially difficult in areas or industries where cyber is now on the uptake. Like there's some mature industries like network security, banking, health. Those are mature, but there definitely was a time when those were not mature. So space is going through that time now. This is the hard problem. So why is it hard? This is perceived as new, different, and that some parts may or may not apply. This is particularly true for monitoring. It seems like this industry has put a lot of investment on the front door, ground station uplink, and that cybersecurity within the satellite, the thing that is doing the most work of what you're selling, there's not a whole lot of monitoring and additional security in there traditionally. I know that's improving, and thanks to the efforts here with CYSAT in the industry, things are moving up, but this is an element of why it's hard. There's this perception that it's new. But space systems are they're simply specialized platforms in space. Cyber on platforms is a problem that we know how to solve. Complex platforms are something we can solve. Defending critical infrastructure, which a lot of satellites are, is a problem we know how to solve. And defending interconnected, interdependent systems is also not a new problem. This evolution that space is now going through, I want to assure everybody in the industry that you're not alone. You're not the only ones to have gone through this. There was a time in the telecom industry didn't really see value in defending their critical infrastructure, where you had to try to convince someone in the nuclear energy or the industrial control system area that they may want to have firewalls and security and authentication when you're trying to remote control something critical like a power plant or a nuclear facility. I've been in briefings where I'm trying to convince military leaders that cyber can be something that can be used against them from a strategic or a tactical perspective. Fast forward 15 years later, and pretty much every country represented in the room's national military has a cyber command or a major capability that can do offense and defense for them. Cloud technology didn't take it seriously at the beginning, and neither did IoT. So now space has its turn. So what we need to do is try to, the critical piece is not what to do, it's why to do it within this industry. Another challenge we have is that cyber normally applies, I'll generalize that to checklists, but there's fixed solutions that they try to apply to every problem. And this can be problematic in new industries because you need to adapt those technologies to the operating environment and the threats that you're experiencing. So one of my principal concerns in this field for space is that we have that the industry produces and people try to implement non-tailored technologies, things that are not going to be optimized for the space environment. Other challenges. Security is normally segregated. This is something that happens in all industries. You have security people, you have operations people, you have engineering people. Those people don't talk to each other. Although the engineers create the landscape that you're going to defend, the security folks are defending the core business that you're trying to operate, and the operators need to do the business. So we need those groups to be connected. Also tools, people tend to create tools for one group and another group and not share those, so there's a lot of synergies that I'll talk about. And accountability is generally segregated, and once you have that, then you don't have the opportunity to have a cohesive, harmonized plan. So that's a bit about why it's hard. Oh, why am I'm out of sync. There we go. So cyber's often not framed in terms of business. So your cyber people normally sit there and talk about things that they need to do technically, but not framed and oriented in a way that business leaders can understand. They use a different language, terminology. They're not using things from a business perspective. So we need to frame cyber in terms of business objectives. So one of the examples of that is this. So as we can see, the red line here is basically the cost when you have an event. So the cost of incidents when you have no security is fairly high, and it's also variable. You can't really predict what it's going to be. But fairly high cost for no investment. As you slowly start to invest, that line comes down. It's going to be different for everybody, but conceptually this is accurate. Then there comes to a point where your investment in security has to be increased so drastically to get the last marginal bit. So really, from a business perspective, your security objective needs to be find that optimal range for you and then stick in it. This means that you want to make sure that your investment is not proportionally too high for your cost of incidents and impact. That includes your impact to your business, and you want to stay in that sort of ideal zone. Anything to the right, your left-hand side is going to be variable, and everything to the right-hand side is a lot more deterministic. If you want to err, I would suggest you want to be on the right-hand side of that curve so that you can control more of the events that happen and the expenditures that you have. So what does good security look like? It stabilizes your cost from a business perspective. It allows you to make risk decisions before actual events occur. It provides operators with tools that they can use, and we'll explain how we want to be able to use cyber tools for normal operations. You want to optimize for complexity, and you want to make sure you're driving the cost of your adversary up for as minimal cost as you can. Right? So this is a tactics. This is a bit of the tactics in cyber generally, is you don't need to be 100% secure in every respect. You need to be secure enough so that adversaries decide you're not worth my time. Well, incorrect security does the opposite of that, right? So we have burdens operations, complicates engineering and maintenance, and increased costs needlessly. So what does intrusion detection look like? So we'll start with discussing why we want to monitor. There's a lot of security controls. There are security things going into the satellite segment. Those are all great. I'm not knocking any of those. But the question, there's one set of questions, or two specific questions that those controls, those safeguards can't answer. The first one is, am I currently hacked? What's the current state of my satellite? Right? And the second one is an anomaly I just saw a security issue, or is it a technical fault? So those are important. If you're a military satellite, if you're a communication satellite, if you provide some service, right, you should be able to answer the question, is somebody currently on my satellite? So next question is, what are we going to monitor? Again, I promised this was going to be a technical presentation. So just for general awareness, these are the types of things that you want to monitor within a satellite to determine if there's been an attack. Normally, as I'll talk about next, there's a specific sets of these that you want to monitor. But you're talking about memory, manipulation of memory, things resident in memory, code, existing, new, constants that you use to maybe calculate rotation and other things, communication on your buses, and permissions that you may have between components or within your OBC. Where to monitor is a great question, and this is much of the art in setting up monitoring for any sort of thing, which is you need to have a process by which you identify how a particular system is going to be attacked, and that should be based not on vulnerability, because there's lots of those. It needs to be based considering vulnerability, but driven by what adversaries are likely to try to attempt. If an attack is unlikely or zero likelihood, it's not a risk and you don't need to worry about it. Right? We need to be looking at, and out of the top 20 possible attacks, there's going to be the top 5 that are going to be most likely to be attempted, right? Focus in on those. But it needs to be architecture and design. It needs to be engineered at the beginning, because the decisions you make are going to either influence, enable, or disable your ability to do security things or monitor your platform. And in all cases, I need to optimize for complexity, cost, weight, and utility. If I forget to hit that button, somebody throw something at me, okay? Onboard. So what does this look like onboard? So DISC, over the past 4 years, we've been involved in some programs from the Canadian military, and they've paid us to develop, which is our own IP, an onboard monitoring system. So I'm going to give you some examples. This is sort of what we think onboard monitoring is and what should be. So the onboard system's main goal should be gathering indicators. You've already identified in the previous steps engineering and threat assessment of what those things are, which ones are relevant to you. You've broken up those attack into constituent particular indicators, and then you need to gather them from the satellite platform. This needs to be done in a way that's isolated and protected from the actual satellite's execution. What I mean by that is, as soon as someone attacks your platform and is in your platform and can control your platform, you can no longer trust the things that it's telling you. So you need an independent system. This is why we went hardware for our particular platform. It can conceivably be done in other ways. And you want to do this in a way that minimizes power, weight, and processing capability. So gather your information, make sure it's protected. Then you need to send it down home to Earth. You need to do that in a way that maintains its integrity and its confidentiality. You don't want an adversary to be able to see what it is you've seen them doing. So protect your information before it goes down. And then, in my opinion, let something on the ground do all the heavy lifting. Anytime when someone's saying, let's do a whole lot of processing in space, I'm not a space, I didn't grow up in the space industry, but putting more processing and relying on things that are now you can't touch to do all of your analysis, it seems to me like it has a lot of negatives and drawbacks to it. And then figure out how you automate reporting, which should include some sort of a root cause analysis, because the last thing you need is an alarm that you don't understand. So some interesting case studies. So again, between 2000 and 2001, we built a whole taxonomy, which we've then contributed that work over to the Sparta project. We've also done some extensive work in understanding attack scenarios against satellite platforms. What are things that would be useful for an attacker to do? What are things that are not useful for an operator to have happen to them? So this is sort of the basis that we're drawing. We've also done we did a very large war game with some satellite operators to try to understand what was the most beneficial elements of internal monitoring. How do you get value other than just detecting the bad guy? And then last summer we validated a set of scenarios against an actual military-grade Canadian imagery satellite in their high-fidelity lab. So from that perspective, I want to ask a couple questions to the group. This is not a question and answer, but we just sort of pose these. Is if you have a satellite operations team and they start discovering a range of things that are occurring, how is it that you're going to detect whether or not the power fluctuation is due to an attack or due to some other anomaly, right? So there's some questions like how do you tell what caused the attack rapidly and efficient manner? How much time did you spend considering that as an option or as an attack as an option or to rule it out? How do you then shape your response if you don't know that the event you're looking at is a cyber attack? And how many of these did you ignore? In our war games, we often came up to situations where the operators would say, if I saw this thing without having the monitoring capability, I would probably ignore that. This is a power fluctuation. This is a slight, difference in some of my telemetry information, or there was a slight change in orbit, or these sort of things. They would try to fix, but in some cases they would not pay attention to those. So it's important that we are able, to find when these sort of situations occur, and when those are caused by cyber intrusion. The most dangerous one is the fifth one, right? When everything is working fine. Because you have no other indication on your operations team as to if there is a problem, right? And number 5 is where adversaries are going to try to be. They're going to try to do things that minimize any other observable impact until the time where they're going to want to actually produce something. When you're attacking from a strategic perspective, country on country type things, you don't want to give up the fact that you're in a system until you want to cause the effect that you're there to do. The one unique element of what we found is that there's basically there's very few ways or possible ways that you're actually going to identify a supply chain attack unless you have an onboard monitoring system, right? Because it's something that comes from within the system. It's not going to come through the ground station or your uplink, so nothing else that you're doing is going to protect you from that. So for those missions or contracts that are doing supply chain security without monitoring is a bit curious for me. I would also suggest that if you don't have monitoring on like a quantum key distribution system that's providing your keys to everybody, but you can't say whether or not that platform's been hacked, that's also a bit of a quandary. Or where you have satellite as a service implementations and you have other people running code within an environment, constantly changing to new pieces of code in that environment, not understanding what that code did to the base, host operating system, that satellite, is something that may also be a significant concern. So, aside from, I think, the obvious point of finding when somebody attacks you, the other element of this is that, of the business perspective, is that you need to get contracts. And there's a couple strategic drivers of getting business that should be considered. One of them is that standards are coming. Standards for monitoring, you may have country clients or international clients that are going to be demanding that you apply or you adhere to specific standards. You may get security requirements checklists from clients before you engage. They are willing to give you their data. I would expect in the next few years that insurance companies start asking the question like they do in every other industry on the planet. Do you have monitoring, and what is your security state of your satellite before I insure you for loss? Requirements from investors, and you may have payload requirements from clients. You guys are supposed to throw stuff at me. Okay. From a business benefit, also other sort of tangible business benefits that we found from some of our research in this field. Definitely things need to be automated, accurate, and informative alerts. We definitely don't want to have anybody trying to figure out alarms when they happen. Having a trusted source of onboard data was not just useful for your security team, it was also useful for any of the operations folks trying to understand what happened on the platform. So again, once you have an intrusion, you can't trust any of that. So having a source of information that you can trust regardless of the security state of the satellite was useful. There were a range of attacks that we're aware of and methods that you can't really detect through other means if you don't have it on your system. We found a significant reduction in how people would, or how much time it would take to troubleshoot different events, just from an operations perspective. Because if you can look at a security system and say, that's clear, we don't have any intrusions, then what you're doing is you just eliminated the need to consider those as you then focus on the real problem. So from that perspective, in my opinion, there are significant benefits to, at a day-to-day perspective, of having this type of system in place. The other benefit is don't make these guys rich, or at least make them work hard for their money. I don't think we've seen a ransomware attack against a satellite system yet, but it'll happen. So how do we build out a monitoring program? The first thing we need to do is, if you're setting this up in your organization, the technology is important, the design's important, but there's some programmatic elements that you're going to need to make sure that you're doing this effectively within your organization. First one is you need to integrate the space segment with the rest of security, and you need to do that at the beginning from the design phase so that you have identified all of those things that you need to do on the technical bit, but also the processes, people, technology you need to execute that. Specifically finding non-security uses for your platform. And I'll give you just a terrestrial example of this. If you're managing a whole bunch of servers that are providing you services, and sometimes those can get an update, things can change, configurations can happen, misconfigurations can happen. You can use an intrusion detection system based on how you're operating that system to ensure that you can see any variances from normal operations, right? And once you've done that, you can see those variances, you can detect them, and you can pass them to your operations folks to say, hey, something just went out of whack. And you can do that before you actually feel the impact of that thing occurring. Any program for cybersecurity in general, particularly monitoring, you need to understand what your threat and attack surface is. The attack surface means throughout all of the ways that someone can get into your system, how is it going to be attacked specifically, and then you can use that information, as I explained, to design safeguards and design your monitoring strategy. So you need that threat and attack surface. If you don't have that and you're implementing cyber or monitoring, you're probably not doing it effectively. And you need to update that as time passes because threats can shift. You need to prepare your business and operations response actions or options. So going through a process where you identify threats, what you're monitoring, your response allows you to then make decisions early, and you can actually risk manage things that may occur. So if you're the chief executive officer of a satellite company and you're worried about the business impact of different types of events occurring, then going through this process allows you to make those risk decisions in a time when you're not in crisis, right? And that is highly valuable. You don't want to be pressured, and then you're also limited by what you have. So the options of what you have at the time is what you have. If you prepare and you plan beforehand, then you can decide those little tweaks and processes. You can decide the people that you need, and then you can make sure you have the capabilities in place to risk manage to whatever level you feel to. I always say, like, I don't care if you do nothing in security. I don't care, right? As long as you did nothing deliberately. Because then it's risk. That's managed. Doing nothing is a viable option. Maybe. You want to develop the common tools and sets for ops and security. Really, they don't need to be two separate things. Operations and security need to be highly linked together. The most effective ops centers I've ever seen have been ones where you have your ops people and your security people literally sitting next to each other so that they can feed off each other, they can resolve problems very easily. If not, your security team is going to miss things, and so will your operations team. So once you build this program, so you understand, the threats, what I'm monitoring with the rest of those pieces, we need to test. We need to test it from a person perspective, from a planning perspective, like run through and trial these out. And then tune it. Tuning means, you try, you found some problems, you make some changes, you try again, and you tune it to the degree that you're comfortable with. Then you want to be able to launch and then afterward monitor. And then probably the most important element of this is after you've built it, you need to practice. So as an executive leading a company, if you've invested millions of dollars into a cyber program, you need to practice executing it, even though you're not getting things, and particularly in an environment where you're going to get attacks less often on your satellite platform than you would your Windows machine, right? That's true. So you're going to want to practice that with some frequency that gives you confidence that your organization can respond effectively, so that you're ready when the response happens to actually execute it in a meaningful manner. So that was our our view on a couple things. Why, the problems with cyber, what does a monitoring system look like, and some of the strategic business drivers as to why that's useful for a company. So now that's it for me. So I'll be open for questions. If there's any sort of technical questions about platforms, I would ask you just to go to our booth. And but if general questions about monitoring or business structures, the things I talked about here, then happy to answer those. I would also like to remind that people who signed up for our iPad draw, it's going to be at the booth right after this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We can give you a warm round of applause. Please come and have a seat. Thank you very much for your views on how to mainstream effectively cybersecurity for corporation, but also towards interns, company, policymakers, et cetera. You said no technical questions here, but still, I don't know if this one I can raise. It's from Brendan Bailey from the audience. You mentioned doing most of the analysis on the ground. Our research has shown the control loop delay of trying to determine an attack and then respond is risk to the spacecraft. We believe intrusion prevention automated response is a must. What are your thoughts on response?
Yeah, so Brendan, you're referring to the response on the ground station, automated responses. So from a practical perspective, I know there's a lot of vendors who claim to be able to do this, but in a practical sense, in high-value systems, I've almost never seen, there's only very, very few niche cases, automated defense going in. And that's because you're taking the control of what happens out of the business owner, and you're giving it to another system. And that's risk. So although theoretically I think that's an interesting technology, militaries have been experimenting with that for a number of years. Telcos have experimenting with that for a number of years. And I don't actually see a lot of places where they actually turn that on. So maybe from a ground station, but in a satellite, I would never want sort of an automated defense system doing something. I would instead want to design for simplicity, understand what you're monitoring for, block things deliberately, and then prepare responses beforehand that you yourself initiate. From a timing perspective, because your adversary has to go through a command channel to get there, there's likely a battle for time, depending on who you're fighting with. But I think that it's not advisable from my perspective to heavily rely on automated defenses.
Well, we will discuss this quickly afterwards. It's the theme of the next conference. We will try to merge the two questions from the audience. The one from Oliver Germer: what indicators of compromise have you seen in real life? And the other one is from Nicolas Finet: how does the spacecraft IDS takes into account specificities of different onboard implementations and different mission contexts and payloads?
Yeah, so those are definitely two different questions.
Indeed.
So the first one, I'd say come to the booth and have a chat about what we've done and what we're aware of currently. What's the second question? IDS takes into account specifications, different onboard implementations. So you have to in every case. There's not like, you can't drop it's not like dropping antivirus on a Windows machine. You need to customize what you're looking for based on the architecture and the mission of the thing that you're monitoring. And then you need to customize what you're doing to that actual platform. So yeah, so by its nature, by designing an IDS for a particular system, you have to do that. So the one that we built for the military platform last summer, the main functions are all the same, but you need to have the wiring may be different, what you're actually looking for may be different, how they do instructions in memory, vice on the bus, or there's a whole bunch of architectural differences that you need to take into account. So there's a component of any monitoring system that will have to be highly customized to your platform.
Thank you very much. We will remind that solutions are people, process. Thank you, Nicholas.